My Audiobook Corner original stories.
A Dangerous Rescue by My Audiobook Corner. Chapter 1. The Garden Escape. The moonlight cast silver shadows across the manicured hedges of Ashworth Manor as Lady Catherine Ashworth gathered her skirts and fled down the gravel path. Behind her, Lord Seaton's voice called out with false concern, though she could hear the predatory edge beneath his polished words. "Lady Catherine, surely you're not unwell. Allow me to escort you back inside." She quickened her pace, her heart hammering against her stays. The garden party had been insufferable enough without Seaton's persistent attentions, his hand lingering too long at her elbow, his breath hot against her ear as he whispered suggestions that made her skin crawl. When he'd followed her into the garden, she'd known his intentions were far from honorable. The rose trellis loomed ahead, its climbing vines creating a shadowed alcove. Catherine pressed herself against it, thorns catching at her silk gown, and held her breath as Seaton's footsteps approached. "Come now, my dear," Seaton's voice was closer, oily with false charm. "Your father and I have an understanding. You might as well accustom yourself to my company. After all, a woman of 23 with your spirited reputation cannot afford to be particular." Catherine's hands clenched into fists. She would rather die a spinster than submit to this man's advances. Her fortune was considerable, yes, but it was hers, not some prize for a dissolute lord to claim through manipulation and her father's gambling debts. "I believe the lady wishes to be left alone." Voice that cut through the darkness was deep, commanding, and utterly unexpected. Catherine's breath caught as a tall figure emerged from the shadows of the garden path, Lord James Harrington, Marquess of Thornfield, his broad shoulders blocking Seaton's advance. "Harrington." Seaton's tone turned cold. "This is a private matter." "Private?" James stepped closer, and even in the moonlight, Catherine could see the dangerous glint in his dark eyes. "The lady appears to be hiding from you behind a rose trellis. That suggests your company is decidedly unwelcome. Lady Catherine and I were merely leaving." James's voice brooked no argument. He extended his hand toward Catherine, and she found herself reaching for it without thought. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and electricity shot up her arm at the contact. Seaton's face darkened. "Her father is not here," James interrupted smoothly. "And I suspect he would be most interested to learn that you've been pursuing his daughter into darkened gardens. Shall we discuss it with him?" I'm certain the other guests would find the conversation fascinating. The threat hung in the air between them. Seaton's jaw worked, but he finally stepped back with a curt bow. "This isn't finished, Harrington." "I believe it is." James's tone was final. They watched in silence as Seaton stalked back toward the manor, his footsteps crunching angrily on the gravel. Only when he disappeared through the French doors did Catherine realize she was still holding James's hand, and that he was still holding hers. She pulled away quickly, smoothing her skirts. "Thank you, Lord Harrington. Your timing was most fortuitous." "Fortuitous?" He turned to face her fully, and she was struck by how tall he was, how his presence seemed to fill the garden alcove. "Lady Catherine, what possessed you to venture into a darkened garden alone when a man like Seaton was clearly pursuing you?" Heat flooded her cheeks, part embarrassment, part indignation. "I was attempting to escape him, as you may have noticed." "By trapping yourself in a dead end." His voice was exasperated. "You might have sought out your sister, or remained in the ballroom where there were witnesses. Instead, you gave him the perfect opportunity to compromise you." "Don't require a lecture, my lord." Catherine lifted her chin. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." "Clearly." His tone was dry. "That's why I found you pressed against a rose trellis with thorns in your gown and panic in your eyes." She wanted to argue, but the words died on her lips as she met his gaze. In the moonlight, his features were all sharp angles and shadows, strong jaw, straight nose, lips that were perhaps too sensual for such a stern face. She'd seen him before, of course, at various social functions, but always from a distance. Up close, he was overwhelming. She faltered, then rallied. "I appreciate your assistance, Lord Harrington, but I assure you I had the situation well in hand." "Did you?" He stepped closer, and suddenly the air between them felt charged, electric. "And what was your plan exactly? To hide in the roses until he gave up? to scream and cause a scandal that would ruin your reputation. I would have thought of something, she said, but her voice came out breathless. Reckless. His hand came up, and she froze as his fingers brushed her shoulder, plucking a rose petal from her gown. The touch was brief, impersonal, but it sent heat cascading through her body. And infuriating. Then why did you help me? The question escaped before she could stop it. His eyes met hers, and for a moment something flickered in their depths, something dark and hungry that made her breath catch. Because someone needs to keep you from destroying yourself. They stood there in the moonlight, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something darker, more masculine. Close enough that she could see the pulse beating at his throat, could feel the heat radiating from his body. I should return to the party, she whispered, but she didn't move. You should. His voice was rough. But if you walk back in there with rose petals in your hair and your gown torn, the gossips will have a field day. His hands came up to her hair, and Catherine's heart nearly stopped. With surprising gentleness, he plucked petals and small leaves from her carefully arranged curls, his fingers brushing against her temple, her neck, the sensitive skin behind her ear. Each touch was torture, sending shivers down her spine. There. His voice was lower now, intimate. That's better. But he didn't step away, neither did she. They stood frozen in the moonlight, his hands still raised near her face, her lips parted on a breath she couldn't quite catch. Lord Harrington, James. The word was almost a command. If I'm to keep rescuing you from your own recklessness, you might as well use my given name. I don't need rescuing, she protested weakly. His laugh was low, dark. We'll see about that, Lady Catherine. He stepped back then, breaking the spell, and offered his arm with perfect propriety. Allow me to escort you back inside, and for God's sake, stay away from Seaton. Catherine placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath his coat, and allowed him to lead her back toward the manor. But with every step, she was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the way her body seemed to lean toward his, of the strange, unsettling hunger that had awakened in her belly. She had the distinct feeling that Lord James Harrington was far more dangerous than Lord Seaton could ever be, but in an entirely different way. Chapter 2. Forbidden Dance. Duchess of Pemberton's ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and the jewels adorning London's finest ladies. Catherine stood near the refreshment table, fanning herself and trying to ignore the weight of James's gaze from across the room. 3 weeks had passed since the garden incident, and she'd seen him at every social function since. He watched her with those dark, knowing eyes as though waiting for her next disaster. It was infuriating. It was intoxicating. Staring at Lord Harrington again, her sister Margaret murmured beside her. I'm not. Catherine snapped her fan closed. I was merely observing the room. Margaret's tone was knowing. And the fact that he's been observing you all evening is pure coincidence. Before Catherine could respond, a familiar voice made her stiffen. Lady Catherine. Lord Seaton appeared at her elbow, his smile predatory. I believe you promised me the next dance. I did no such thing. I'm afraid Lady Catherine's dance card is full. James's voice cut through her protest as he materialized beside them, his presence commanding immediate attention. Isn't that right, my lady? Catherine's heart leaped. Yes, quite full. Seton's eyes narrowed. I don't see your name on her card, Harrington. You. James plucked the card from Catherine's wrist with casual possession, produced a pencil from his waistcoat, and proceeded to write his name across every remaining line. How careless of me to forget to claim my dances earlier. Audacity of it stole Catherine's breath. Margaret made a small, shocked sound. Seaton's face darkened with fury. That's highly irregular, is it? James returned the card to Catherine's wrist, his fingers lingering against her pulse point. I was under the impression that Lady Catherine and I had an understanding. Isn't that right, my dear? The endearment sent heat flooding through her. They had no such understanding, but the way he was looking at her, possessive, challenging, hungry, made her want to agree to anything he suggested. She heard herself say, We do. Seton's jaw clenched. This isn't over, Harrington. I believe it is. James's tone was pleasant, but there was steel beneath it. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe our waltz is beginning. He offered his arm, and Catherine took it, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. The orchestra struck up the opening notes of a waltz, and then his hand was at her waist, warm and possessive through the thin silk of her gown, and her hand was in his and they were moving. That was presumptuous, she managed, though her voice came out breathless. That was necessary. His hand tightened at her waist, pulling her infinitesimally closer than propriety allowed. Seaton is becoming bolder. He won't stop pursuing you. Can handle Lord Seaton. Like you handled him in the garden. His eyes glinted. You have a remarkable talent for finding trouble, Lady Catherine. You have a remarkable talent for appearing whenever I do. She met his gaze boldly. One might think you were following me, my lord. James. His voice dropped lower. And perhaps I am. Someone needs to keep you safe from your own recklessness. They turned, and his hand slid slightly higher on her waist, his thumb brushing the underside of her breast through her gown. The touch was brief, possibly accidental, but it sent liquid heat pooling in her belly. Not reckless, she protested. No, he pulled her closer as they navigated a turn, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, smell his cologne. Then what do you call venturing into darkened gardens alone? Or, his eyes darkened. I've heard rumors you've been asking questions about certain charitable organizations. Dangerous questions. Catherine's breath caught. She had been investigating discrepancies in the accounts of a charity supposedly helping orphans, but how did he know? I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me, Catherine. The use of her given name sent shivers down her spine. Whatever you're planning, stop. These men are dangerous. If they're defrauding a charity meant for children, someone needs to expose them. Someone, yes, not you. His hand tightened possessively. Promise me you'll leave it alone. Can't do that. His eyes flashed with frustration and something darker. You're going to be the death of me. Then stop following me, she challenged. I can't. The admission was rough, almost angry. God help me, Catherine, I can't. The music swelled around them and they moved together as though they'd been dancing for years. His hand at her waist was burning through her gown, his fingers laced with hers were strong and sure, and the way he was looking at her, as though he wanted to devour her, made her dizzy. Why? The question escaped as a whisper, his jaw clenched. You know why? Tell me. They turned again, and suddenly they were in a shadowed corner of the ballroom, partially hidden by a marble column. His hand slid higher on her waist, definitely improper now, and his thumb brushed deliberately against the curve of her breast. Because every time I see you, I want to do things that would scandalize this entire ballroom, he said, his voice rough with desire. Because watching you dance with other men makes me want to commit violence. Because the thought of Seaton touching you makes me insane. Catherine's breath came in short gasps. I dream about you, he continued, his eyes burning into hers. About your hair spread across my pillow, about your skin beneath my hands, about the sounds you would make if I... He stopped abruptly, his jaw clenching as though he'd said too much, but the damage was done. Heat flooded Catherine's body, pooling between her thighs, making her ache with unfamiliar need. If you what? She whispered daringly. His eyes darkened to almost black. If I touched you the way I want to, if I tasted you, if I made you come apart in my arms. The crude words should have shocked her. Instead, they sent liquid fire through her veins. She swayed toward him, and his arm tightened around her waist, holding her upright as they continued to move through the steps of the waltz. You shouldn't say such things, she managed. I know. His thumb stroked her waist, a maddening caress. Just as you shouldn't look at me the way you do, as though you want the same things I want. How do you know what I want? Don't I? He pulled her closer, scandalously close, and she could feel the hard length of him pressed against her belly through their clothing. Your pupils are dilated. Your pulse is racing. Your lips are parted and you're breathing like you've been running. You want me, Catherine, admit it. She should deny it. Should slap him and storm away. Instead, she met his gaze boldly and whispered, yes. His control nearly shattered. She could see it in the way his eyes flared, in the way his hand clenched convulsively at her waist. But they were in a ballroom full of people, and propriety held them both captive. Playing with fire, he warned. Perhaps I like the burn. Music ended, and they stood frozen for a moment, staring at each other while the other dancers applauded. Then James stepped back with visible effort, bowing formally over her hand. But when his lips brushed her gloved knuckles, his eyes held a promise that made her knees weak. The next dance is mine as well, he said, And the one after that, and every dance for the rest of the evening. I won't let Seton near you." "After the ball?" she asked recklessly. His smile was dark, dangerous. "After the ball, you're going to go home like a good girl and forget about investigating charity fraud. Because if you don't, Catherine, I'll be forced to take more drastic measures to keep you safe." "What kind of measures?" He leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "The kind that would require me to marry you afterward to preserve your reputation." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Catherine trembling and aching and more determined than ever to pursue her investigation, if only to see what those drastic measures might entail. Chapter 3: Danger in the Shadows. Catherine knew she was being reckless. James's warnings echoed in her mind as her hired carriage rattled through the darkening streets toward the Thames-side warehouse district. But the evidence she'd uncovered was damning. Thousands of pounds meant for orphans had been diverted, and the trail led here, to a warehouse owned by one of the charity's trustees. She'd left a note for Margaret, vague enough to avoid immediate alarm but specific enough that someone would know where to look if she didn't return. It was a precaution, nothing more. She would simply observe, gather evidence, and leave. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows dark. Catherine paid the driver and instructed him to wait, then gathered her cloak around her and approached the building. A side door stood slightly ajar, and she slipped inside, her heart hammering. The interior was cavernous and shadowed, lit only by moonlight filtering through grimy windows. Crates were stacked everywhere, and Catherine moved between them carefully, looking for the office she knew must be here somewhere. She found it at the back, a small room with a desk covered in papers. Catherine's hands trembled as she rifled through them, finding exactly what she'd suspected. Ledgers showing the diverted funds, correspondence detailing the scheme. She was gathering the most damning documents when she heard voices. "Told you someone was asking questions. It's handled. Seton's going to marry the girl and she'll stop her meddling." Catherine's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the wall behind the door as footsteps approached. "And if she doesn't?" "Then we'll handle it another way. Women have accidents all the time." The casual cruelty in the voice made Catherine's stomach turn. She needed to leave now, but the men were between her and the exit. She looked around desperately for another way out, but there was none. The door swung open and a man entered, one of the charity trustees she'd seen at society functions. His eyes widened when he saw her. Well, Lady Catherine Ashworth, I should have known." Catherine tried to run, but he grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. She screamed, and another man appeared, larger and more menacing. "Quiet," the trustee hissed. "No one can hear you down here anyway." "Me go," Catherine struggled, but his grip was iron. "I don't think so. You've been very troublesome, my lady, but that ends tonight." Terror flooded through her as the larger man advanced. This was it. She'd been too reckless, too confident, and now she was going to pay for it with her life. Then the door exploded inward. James stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. He held a pistol in one hand and his eyes promised violence. "Let her go." Trustee's grip loosened in shock, and Catherine wrenched free, stumbling toward James. But the larger man lunged for her, and James moved with deadly speed. The pistol cracked, and the man fell with a scream, clutching his shoulder. James grabbed Catherine and shoved her behind him, then turned on the trustee with savage intent. His fist connected with the man's jaw with a sickening crunch, and the trustee crumpled. "Are there others?" James's voice was deadly calm. I don't know, Catherine." He didn't look at her, his attention fixed on the groaning men. "Are you hurt?" "No, then run. Now my carriage is outside." But Catherine couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The reality of what had almost happened crashed over her, and her legs gave out. James caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her into his arms and carrying her from the warehouse. His carriage waited in the shadows, and he deposited her inside before barking orders to his driver. Then he was beside her, the door slamming shut, and they were moving. "What the hell were you thinking?" His voice was rough with fury and fear. "I told you these men were dangerous." "I told you to leave it alone." "I had to. You had to nothing." He grabbed her shoulders, his fingers digging in. "You could have been killed, Catherine. Do you understand that? They were going to kill you." "I know," her voice broke. I know, I'm sorry, His mouth crashed down on hers. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined. It was fierce, desperate, almost violent in its intensity. His hands tangled in her hair, destroying her careful coiffure, and his tongue invaded her mouth with possessive hunger. Catherine gasped against his lips and kissed him back just as desperately, her hands clutching at his coat. He pulled her onto his lap, and she went willingly, straddling him on the carriage bench. His hands were everywhere, her back, her waist, her hips, pulling her closer until she could feel the hard length of him pressed against her core through their clothing. "Never again," he growled against her mouth. "Do you hear me? Never again." Kissed her again, swallowing her words. His hands slid up her ribcage, and then he was cupping her breasts through her gown, his thumbs finding her nipples and circling them until she moaned. "Mine," he said roughly. "Mine to protect, mine to keep safe, mine." The word was a gasp as his mouth moved to her throat, sucking and biting at the sensitive skin. "Yes, James, yes." His hands moved to her back, finding the fastenings of her gown. She should stop him, should protest, but she couldn't. She wanted this, wanted him, with a desperation that terrified her. The bodice of her gown loosened, and he pulled it down along with her chemise, barring her breasts to his gaze. For a moment, he just looked at her, his eyes dark with hunger. "Beautiful," he breathed. "So goddamn beautiful." Then his mouth was on her breast, hot and wet, and Catherine cried out. His tongue circled her nipple before he sucked it into his mouth, and pleasure shot straight to her core. She rocked against him instinctively, seeking friction, and he groaned against her skin. Catherine. Her name was a prayer and a curse. "We shouldn't." "Don't stop." Her hands tangled in his hair, holding him to her breast. "Please, James, don't stop." He switched to her other breast, lavishing it with the same attention while his hand slid up her thigh beneath her skirts. Catherine's breath came in gasps as his fingers found the slit in her drawers, then the wet heat of her sex. "God, you're soaked." His voice was reverent. "Is this for me?" "Yes." She was beyond shame, beyond propriety. "Yes, James, for you." His fingers stroked through her folds, finding the sensitive bundle of nerves at her apex and circling it with maddening skill. Catherine's hips bucked and she ground herself against his hand, chasing the pleasure building inside her. "That's it," he encouraged, his mouth still at her breast. "Take what you need, use me." His fingers slid lower and then one was pushing inside her, stretching her. Catherine gasped at the intrusion, but he gentled her with kisses, working his finger deeper until she adjusted to the sensation. "So tight," he groaned. "So perfect." He added a second finger, and Catherine whimpered at the stretch. But then he was moving them in and out, his thumbs circling her pearl, and the pleasure was overwhelming. She rode his hand shamelessly, her breasts bouncing with each movement, her head thrown back in abandon. "Look at me," James commanded. "I want to see your face when you come." Catherine forced her eyes open, meeting his gaze. The raw hunger there pushed her over the edge. Pleasure exploded through her body, and she cried out his name as she shattered, her inner muscles clenching around his fingers. He worked her through it, drawing out her climax until she collapsed against his chest, trembling and gasping. His arms came around her, holding her close, and she could feel his heart hammering against her cheek. "We can't do this again," he said roughly. "Not until you're my wife." Catherine's head snapped up. "Your wife?" His jaw was set, determined. "Yes, I'm going to marry you, Catherine. I'm going to make you mine in every way, but not like this, not in a carriage after you've nearly been killed. You deserve better." "Don't want better." Her hand slid down his chest to the hard length straining against his breeches. "I want you." He caught her wrist, stopping her. "No, not yet. When I take you, Catherine, it will be in a proper bed as my wife. I won't ruin you." "You already have," she whispered. His smile was dark. "Not yet, but I will. Soon." Carriage rolled to a stop outside Ashworth Manor, and James helped her right her clothing with gentle hands. Before she could leave, he caught her chin and kissed her softly. "Speak to your father tomorrow," he said. "And Catherine, if you ever put yourself in danger like that again, I'll lock you in my house and never let you out." She should have been offended. Instead, the possessive promise sent heat flooding through her again. "Yes, my lord," she said meekly, and his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I mean it. I know." She kissed him once more, then slipped from the carriage before he could see the smile on her face. She had no intention of being locked away. But the thought of James trying to enforce such a punishment was deliciously intriguing. Chapter 4. The Study Confessions. 3 days later, Catherine sat at the Harrington family dinner table, trying to focus on the conversation while acutely aware of James's presence beside her. He'd spoken to her father as promised, and the engagement had been announced. They would marry in 6 weeks, 6 weeks of this exquisite torture. Since the warehouse incident, James had been the perfect gentleman, attentive but proper, never touching her beyond what propriety allowed. It was driving her mad. She could still feel his fingers inside her, still taste his kiss, still hear his rough voice promising to make her his. "Catherine," Margaret's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you quite well? You seem distracted." "I'm fine." Catherine forced a smile. "Just tired." "Perhaps you should retire early," James suggested, his voice carefully neutral. But when she met his eyes, they were dark with hunger. "Perhaps I should." She rose, and James stood as well, ever the gentleman. "Allow me to escort you," he said. "I need to retrieve some papers from my study anyway." Margaret's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but she said nothing as James offered Catherine his arm. They walked in silence through the corridors of Harrington House, the tension between them thick enough to cut. When they reached his study, James opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Catherine stepped inside and he followed, closing the door behind them. "You didn't really need papers, did you?" she asked. "No." He leaned against the door, his eyes raking over her. "I needed to be alone with you before I went mad." "James," he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, his mouth claiming hers with desperate hunger. Catherine melted against him, her hands sliding up his chest to tangle in his hair. "Been going insane," he muttered against her lips. "Sitting beside you at dinner, smelling your perfume, watching your mouth, and not being able to touch you. Then touch me now." She pulled at his cravat, loosening it. "Please, James." He groaned and walked her backward until her hips hit his desk. Then he was lifting her onto it, stepping between her spread thighs. His hands already working at the fastenings of her gown. "We shouldn't," he said, even as he pulled her bodice down. "We agreed to wait." "Don't want to wait." Catherine's hands went to his waistcoat, unfastening buttons with trembling fingers. "I want you now." His control snapped. He yanked her chemise down, barring her breasts, and bent to take one nipple into his mouth. Catherine cried out, her back arching, and his hands slid up her thighs beneath her skirts. "God, Catherine." His voice was muffled against her breast. "You're going to be the death of me." "Then die happy," she gasped as his fingers found her sex, already wet and ready for him. He stroked her expertly, his fingers sliding through her folds before circling her pearl. Catherine's hips bucked and she reached for the fastenings of his breeches, desperate to touch him. "Wait." He caught her hands. "If you touch me, I won't be able to stop." "Don't want you to stop, Catherine." His forehead pressed against hers. "I promised myself I wouldn't take you until our wedding night. I won't break that promise." "Then don't take me." Her hand slipped free and cupped him through his breeches, feeling the hard, thick length of him. "But let me touch you. Let me pleasure you the way you've pleasured me." He groaned, his hips jerking into her touch. "You're going to kill me." "Probably." She worked at his fastenings, and then he was free, hot and hard in her hand. James's head fell back with a curse as she stroked him, learning the feel of him, the silky skin, the rigid length, the way he pulsed in her grip. His fingers never stopped their movement between her thighs, circling and stroking until she was gasping. "Faster," he commanded roughly. "Grip me tighter." She obeyed, and his hips began to move, thrusting into her fist. His thumb found her pearl and pressed hard, and Catherine cried out as pleasure crashed through her. Her inner muscles clenched around nothing, and she whimpered with frustration. "I know." James's voice was strained. "I know, sweetheart. Soon. Soon I'll fill you, stretch you, make you mine completely. But not yet." He pulled her hand away from his length and pressed it against the desk, then positioned himself between her thighs. The head of his cock pressed against her entrance, and Catherine's breath caught. "James, I'm not going to take you," he said roughly, "but I need to feel you just like this." He rocked his hips, sliding his length through her wet folds without penetrating her. The friction was maddening, his hardness rubbing against her pearl with each thrust. Catherine wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer, and he groaned. "You feel so good." His hands gripped her hips, holding her steady as he moved. "So wet, so hot. When I finally take you, Catherine, when I finally push inside you, you're going to scream my name." She was beyond coherent thought, lost in the pleasure of his body moving against hers. "Yes, James, yes." His movements became more urgent, his breathing harsh. Catherine could feel her own climax building again, the pressure coiling tighter and tighter in her belly. "Come for me," James commanded. "Let me feel you come apart." His hand slid between them, his fingers finding her pearl and circling it with perfect pressure. Catherine shattered, her cry muffled against his shoulder as pleasure exploded through her. She felt him stiffen, felt the hot pulse of his release against her belly, heard his guttural groan as he found his own completion. They collapsed together, trembling and gasping. James's forehead rested against hers, his breath hot against her lips. 6 weeks, he said roughly. 6 weeks and then you're mine." "I'm already yours," Catherine whispered. His kiss was gentle this time, almost reverent. "Yes, you are. And I'm yours, completely." He helped her clean up and right her clothing, his touches tender now, but when she moved to leave, he caught her hand. "Catherine." His voice was serious. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "No more investigating. No more putting yourself in danger. I can't." His jaw clenched. "I can't lose you, not now, not ever." She saw the fear beneath his stern expression, the vulnerability he rarely showed. This wasn't about control or possession, it was about love. "Promise," she said softly. "No more danger." He pulled her close, holding her as though she might disappear. "Thank you." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, and Catherine realized that what she felt for James went far beyond physical desire. She loved him, his strength, his protectiveness, his passion. She loved him with a depth that terrified and exhilarated her. "James," she whispered. "Love you." His arms tightened around her. "I love you too, more than I thought possible." When she finally left his study and returned to her room, Catherine's body still hummed with pleasure and her heart was full. 6 weeks suddenly seemed like an eternity. Chapter 5, Trapped Together. The attack came without warning. Catherine's carriage had just left the modiste's shop when masked men on horseback surrounded it. Her driver shouted, the horses screamed, and then rough hands were wrenching open the door. "Lord Seton sends his regards." One of the men growled, reaching for her. Catherine screamed and kicked, her foot connecting with his jaw. But there were too many of them, and she was being dragged from the carriage when another carriage careened around the corner at breakneck speed. James. He leaped from his moving carriage with a roar of fury, his fists already swinging. Catherine watched in awe as he fought like a man possessed, his movements brutal and efficient. One attacker went down with a broken nose, another with a kick to the ribs. The man holding Catherine released her and fled, and the others quickly followed. James stood in the street, breathing hard, his knuckles bloody. Then he turned to Catherine, and the raw fear in his eyes made her heart clench. "In my carriage," he said roughly. "Now!" She obeyed without question, and he followed, slamming the door and shouting orders to his driver. The carriage lurched into motion, and then James was pulling her into his arms, his hands running over her frantically. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you? Catherine, answer me." "I'm fine." Her voice shook. "I'm fine, James, I promise." He crushed her against his chest, his whole body trembling. "When I saw them grab you," his voice broke, "I thought I'd lost you." "You didn't." She pulled back to look at him. "You saved me again." This was Seton. His voice was cold with fury. "He's trying to force your hand, to compromise you so you'll have to marry him instead of me. That will never happen." His eyes burned into hers. "It won't. Because you're mine, Catherine, mine." His mouth crashed down on hers, and Catherine kissed him back desperately, needing to feel alive, to feel safe. His hands tangled in her hair, and she climbed onto his lap, straddling him as she had in the warehouse. But this time, there was no hesitation. James's hands went to her skirts, yanking them up around her waist, while Catherine worked frantically at the fastenings of his breeches. They were both shaking, both desperate, the fear and adrenaline transforming into raw, primal need. "I need you," Catherine gasped against his mouth. "James, please, I need you." Yet, his voice was strained as he freed himself from his breeches. "Not like this, but God, Catherine, I need to feel you." He positioned himself between her thighs, and Catherine sank down onto him, taking him as deep as she could without actual penetration. The thick head of his cock pressed against her entrance, stretching her, and she whimpered at the sensation. "Move," James commanded, his hands gripping her hips. "Ride me." Catherine began to move, rocking her hips, sliding her wet heat along his length. The friction was exquisite torture, his hardness rubbing against her pearl with each movement. James's head fell back against the seat, his jaw clenched, his hands guiding her movements. "Faster," he groaned. "Harder." She obeyed, grinding down on him with increasing urgency. The carriage rocked with their movements, and Catherine didn't care if the driver could hear, didn't care about anything except the pleasure building inside her. James's hand slid between them, his fingers finding her pearl and circling it with perfect pressure. Catherine cried out, her movements becoming erratic as her climax approached. "That's it," James encouraged roughly. "Come for me. Let me feel you." His fingers pressed harder, and Catherine shattered, her inner muscles clenching as waves of pleasure crashed through her. She felt James stiffen beneath her, felt the hot pulse of his release against her sex, and the sensation pushed her higher. She collapsed against his chest, trembling and gasping. His arms came around her, holding her close. And she could feel his heart hammering against her cheek. 4 weeks, he said roughly. 4 more weeks, and then I'm going to take you properly. I'm going to make you my wife in every way. I can't wait that long, Catherine whispered. You'll have to. His hand stroked her hair. Because when I finally take you, Catherine, when I finally push inside you and make you mine, I want it to be perfect. I want you in my bed, in my home, with my ring on your finger and my name is yours. She pulled back to look at him. You're a romantic. His smile was wry. Only with you. Carriage rolled to a stop outside Ashworth Manor, and James helped her right her clothing once more. But before she could leave, he caught her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. I'm going to deal with Seaton, he said. He won't threaten you again. James, don't do anything rash. He tried to have you kidnapped. His voice was cold. He's lucky I don't kill him. Catherine saw the deadly intent in his eyes and knew he meant it. Promise me you won't do anything that could get you arrested. His jaw clenched. I promise I won't kill him, but he's going to regret ever looking at you. She kissed him once more, then slipped from the carriage. As it pulled away, she touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. 4 weeks. She could survive 4 weeks, barely. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. The scandal broke 3 days later. Catherine was having tea with Margaret when their mother burst into the drawing room, her face pale with shock. Margaret, I need to speak with you, privately. Catherine's stomach dropped. What's wrong? Her mother's eyes were cold. This doesn't concern you, Catherine, though perhaps it should, given your behavior. Margaret rose, her face troubled. Mother, now, Margaret. They left, and Catherine sat frozen, her teacup trembling in her hand. Something was very wrong. An hour later, Margaret returned alone. Her face was grave. Catherine, we need to talk. What's happened? Margaret sat beside her and took her hand. Mother found something, letters between you and Lord Harrington. Catherine's blood ran cold. What letters? Don't lie to me. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. I know what's been happening between you and James, the stolen moments, the intimacies. Mother found evidence, Catherine. She's threatening to expose you unless James marries you immediately. We're already engaged. She wants the wedding moved up to next week. Margaret squeezed her hand. She's worried that if word gets out about your behavior, the scandal will ruin not just you, but me as well, my prospects, my reputation. Guilt flooded through Catherine. Margaret, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, be smart. Margaret's eyes were serious. Do you love him? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Yes, I love him. Then marry him. Next week, next month, it doesn't matter. Just marry him and be happy. But Catherine's happiness was overshadowed by shame. She'd been so reckless, so selfish, and now Margaret might pay the price. I need to see James, she said. He's waiting in the garden. Catherine found him by the rose trellis where they'd first met. He turned at her approach, and she saw the tension in his shoulders, the worry in his eyes. You've heard, she said. Your mother paid me a visit this morning. His voice was carefully neutral. She was quite explicit about her demands. James, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Don't apologize. He crossed to her and took her hands. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? Tears burned her eyes. I've been reckless and selfish, and now Margaret's reputation is at risk because of me. You're being forced to marry me immediately when you wanted to wait, when you wanted everything to be perfect. Stop. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. I'm not being forced to do anything. I want to marry you. I've wanted to marry you since the moment I found you hiding in this garden. Not like this. Not because of scandal and obligation. Because of scandal, he agreed. Because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you, because every time I see you I want to keep you, protect you, make you mine in every possible way. Even though I'm reckless and infuriating, his smile was tender. Especially because you're reckless and infuriating. You make me insane, Catherine, but you also make me feel alive in a way I never have before. I love you, she whispered. So much it terrifies me. I know. He kissed her softly. I feel the same way. James. She pulled back to look at him. I need to confess something. His eyes narrowed. What? I've been reckless on purpose. Not all the time, but sometimes I knew you'd come for me. I knew you'd save me. And I wanted. She broke off, embarrassed. You wanted me to rescue you, he finished, his voice rough. You wanted an excuse to be near me. She met his gaze. I'm sorry, it was manipulative and dangerous. It was brilliant. His laugh was low, dark, and infuriating, and so typically you that I should have realized it sooner. You're not angry. Oh, I'm furious. But his eyes were warm. And I'm going to spend the rest of our lives making sure you never need to put yourself in danger to get my attention. Because you'll have it, Catherine, always. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Catherine melted against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. 1 week, he said. Can you wait 1 more week? Barely. Her hand slid down his chest. Can you? His laugh was strained. No, but I'm going to try. Because when I finally make you mine, Catherine, I want to take my time. I want to worship every inch of you. I want to make you scream my name so loudly that the entire household hears it. Heat flooded through her. James, 1 week, he repeated firmly. And then you're mine completely. That night, Catherine lay in her bed, unable to sleep. Her body ached with need, her mind filled with images of James. His hands, his mouth, his body moving against hers. 1 week. She could survive 1 week, but it was going to be the longest week of her life. Chapter 7. The Inevitable Proposal. The week passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Catherine barely saw James except at formal dinners and chaperoned visits, and the forced propriety was torture. Every time their eyes met across a room, she could see the hunger in his gaze, the barely restrained need that matched her own. The night before their wedding, James requested a private audience with her in his study. Margaret accompanied her as chaperone, but when they arrived, James's brother Henry was waiting. Margaret. Henry bowed with a charming smile. Would you care to see the conservatory? I believe there are some rare orchids that might interest you. Margaret's eyes narrowed suspiciously. I'm supposed to chaperone. And you will, from the conservatory, which has a clear view of the study through the glass doors. Henry offered his arm. Come, let's give them a few moments of privacy. They're getting married tomorrow, after all. Margaret hesitated, then sighed. 10 minutes, no more. When they were alone, James locked the study door and turned to Catherine. The hunger in his eyes made her breath catch. Come here, he said roughly. She went to him, and he pulled her into his arms, his mouth claiming hers with desperate need. Catherine kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his hair. I can't wait anymore, she gasped against his lips. James, please. Tomorrow. His hands slid down her back, pulling her against him. Tomorrow night you'll be my wife and I'll make love to you properly. But tonight, he walked her backward until her back hit the desk. Tonight I need to touch you 1 more time. He lifted her onto the desk and pushed her skirts up, his hands sliding up her thighs. Catherine's head fell back as his fingers found her sex, already wet and ready for him. So eager, he murmured, stroking through her folds. So perfect. James, his name was a plea. I need you. I know. He worked at the fastenings of his breeches with his free hand, freeing himself. God, Catherine, I need you too. He positioned himself between her thighs, and Catherine wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer. The head of his cock pressed against her entrance, and she whimpered. Yet, he said roughly, even as his hips rocked forward, sliding through her wetness without penetrating. Tomorrow, I promise. They moved together with desperate urgency, his length sliding against her pearl, her hips rocking to meet his thrusts. James's mouth found her breast through her gown, sucking at her nipple through the fabric, and Catherine cried out. Quiet, he warned. Unless you want Margaret to come running. She bit her lip, trying to muffle her moans as pleasure built inside her. James's hand slid between them, his fingers circling her pearl, and she shattered, her inner muscles clenching as waves of pleasure crashed through her. James groaned, his movements becoming erratic, and then he was finding his own release, his seed spilling hot against her belly. He collapsed against her, both of them trembling and gasping. "Tomorrow," he said roughly. "Tomorrow I'm going to take you to bed and not let you leave for a week. Promise." Catherine's voice was breathless. "Promise." He kissed her deeply. "I love you, Catherine, more than I ever thought possible." "Love you too." She cupped his face. "Thank you for saving me, over and over again." His smile was tender. "Thank you for letting me, for trusting me, for being mine." "Always," she whispered. A knock at the door made them both jump. "Time's up," Margaret called. "Make yourselves presentable." They helped each other straighten their clothing, stealing kisses between adjustments. When they finally emerged from the study, Margaret took one look at their flushed faces and swollen lips and sighed. "One more day," she said. "Surely you can manage one more day of propriety." James's hand found Catherine's, his fingers lacing with hers. "One more day," he agreed. "And then she's mine forever." That night, Catherine lay in her bed for the last time as an unmarried woman. Tomorrow she would become Lady Harrington. Tomorrow James would finally make her his in every way. She could hardly wait. Chapter 8. The Consummation. The wedding ceremony passed in a blur. Catherine was aware of James beside her, tall and handsome in his formal attire, his voice steady as he spoke his vows. She was aware of the guests filling the church, of Margaret dabbing at her eyes, of the weight of the ring James slid onto her finger. But mostly, she was aware of the promise in James's eyes every time he looked at her, a promise of what was to come. The wedding breakfast seemed to last forever. Catherine smiled and accepted congratulations, danced with James and his brother and various relatives, and counted the minutes until they could finally leave. When James's carriage finally pulled away from the celebration, heading toward Harrington Manor, Catherine felt her heart begin to race. This was it. Tonight, James would finally make her his wife in truth. "Nervous?" James asked, his hand finding hers in the darkness of the carriage. Yes, there was no point in lying. "And excited and terrified." "Be terrified." He raised her hand to his lips. "I'm going to take care of you, I promise." Manor was quiet when they arrived, the servants having been given the evening off. James led Catherine up the grand staircase to the master bedchamber, their bedchamber now. The room was beautiful, lit by dozens of candles, the large bed draped in silk. Catherine's breath caught as James closed and locked the door behind them. "Come here," he said softly. She went to him, and he cupped her face, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. His hands moved to her hair, removing pins until her dark curls tumbled down her back. "Beautiful," he murmured. "I've dreamed of seeing you like this." His hands moved to the fastenings of her gown, and Catherine stood still as he slowly undressed her. Gown, petticoats, stays, chemise, until she stood before him in nothing but her stockings and slippers. Perfect. His eyes raked over her, dark with hunger. Absolutely perfect. Catherine's hands went to his cravat, and he stood still as she undressed him in turn. She'd seen parts of him before, felt him through his clothing, but seeing him fully naked for the first time stole her breath. He was magnificent, broad shoulders, muscled chest, narrow hips, and his cock thick and hard and ready for her. "Be afraid," he said, seeing her wide eyes. "I'm not afraid." She reached out and wrapped her hand around him, feeling him pulse in her grip. "I want you." He groaned and swept her into his arms, carrying her to the bed. He laid her down gently, then covered her body with his weight pressing her into the mattress. "I love you," he said, kissing her deeply. "I'm going to make this good for you, I promise." His mouth moved to her throat, then lower, kissing and sucking at her breasts. Catherine arched into him, her hands tangling in his hair as he lavished attention on her nipples, sucking them into hard peaks. "James." His name was a gasp. "Please." Yet, his mouth moved lower, kissing down her belly, and Catherine's eyes widened as she realized his intention. "James, you can't." "I can." He settled between her thighs, his breath hot against her sex. "And I will. I want to taste you, Catherine. I want to make you come on my tongue." Then his mouth was on her, and Catherine cried out at the sensation. His tongue licked through her folds, circling her pearl, and pleasure shot through her body. She tried to close her legs, overwhelmed, but he held them open with his hands, his mouth working her with expert skill. Oh God. Her hips bucked against his face. James, I can't. You can. His voice was muffled against her sex. Let go, Catherine, come for me. His tongue pressed hard against her pearl, and Catherine shattered, her climax crashing through her with devastating force. She cried out his name, her hands fisting in the sheets, her body trembling with pleasure. James kissed his way back up her body, and when he reached her mouth, she could taste herself on his lips. It should have been shocking, but instead it was arousing, and she kissed him back hungrily. Are you ready? He asked, positioning himself between her thighs. Yes. She wrapped her legs around his waist. Make me yours, James, please. He reached between them, guiding himself to her entrance. The head of his cock pressed against her, and Catherine tensed. Relax, he murmured, kissing her softly. I'll go slow. He pushed forward, and Catherine gasped at the stretch. He was so much bigger than his fingers, and the sensation of being filled was overwhelming. Breathe, James commanded, holding still. Just breathe, sweetheart. She forced herself to relax, and he pushed deeper, inch by inch, until he was fully seated inside her. Catherine whimpered at the fullness, the slight burn of the stretch. Are you all right? His voice was strained with the effort of holding still. Yes. She rocked her hips experimentally, and they both groaned. Yes, James, I'm all right. He began to move, slow and careful at first, letting her adjust to the sensation. But as her body relaxed around him, as pleasure began to build again, his thrusts became deeper, harder. God, Catherine. His voice was rough. You feel incredible. So tight, so perfect. Harder, she gasped, her nails digging into his shoulders. James, please, harder. He obeyed, his hips snapping forward with increasing force. The bed rocked beneath them, the headboard hitting the wall with each thrust, and Catherine didn't care. She was lost in the pleasure, in the sensation of James moving inside her, claiming her, making her his. Touch yourself, he commanded. I want to feel you come around my cock. Catherine's hand slid between them, her fingers finding her pearl and circling it. The added stimulation pushed her closer to the edge, and she could feel her climax building. That's it. James's thrusts became erratic. For me, Catherine, let me feel you. Fingers pressed harder, and she shattered, her inner muscles clenching around him as waves of pleasure crashed through her. She screamed his name, and James groaned, his own climax overtaking him. She felt him pulse inside her, felt the hot rush of his seed filling her, and the sensation pushed her higher. He collapsed on top of her, both of them trembling and gasping. After a moment, he rolled to the side, pulling her with him so she was draped across his chest. Are you all right? He asked, his hand stroking her hair. I'm perfect. She kissed his chest. That was perfect. It was. He tilted her face up to kiss her. And we're going to do it again, many, many times, she asked hopefully. His laugh was low and dark. Give me a few minutes to recover, and then yes, I plan to make love to my wife all night long. And he did. They made love twice more before dawn, each time different. Once with Catherine on top, riding him while he watched her with hungry eyes, and once with her on her hands and knees while he took her from behind, his hands gripping her hips as he drove into her with primal intensity. By the time the sun rose, they were both exhausted and sated, tangled together in the sheets. James held Catherine close, his hand stroking lazy patterns on her back. Love you, he murmured. My reckless, infuriating, perfect wife. I love you too, she kissed his chest. My protective, possessive, wonderful husband. More danger, he said. Promise me. I promise. She smiled against his skin. I don't need danger anymore, I have you. His arms tightened around her. You have me, always. They drifted off to sleep as the morning light filtered through the windows, finally complete, finally whole. Catherine had found her rescuer, and James had found his purpose. Together they were perfect, and they lived happily and passionately ever after. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and return to my audiobook corner for more spicy moments, classic romances, and literary treasures. Thank you for listening.